So, welcome everyone to this evening's celebration of the Liturgy of the Day. My name is Osho Brad, and I am one of the priests with the Dragonfly Sangha. And welcome. Happy to have you all here this evening. So, let us start by sharing the peace. May all beings awaken to that peace which is our true home. Let us take refuge. I take refuge in the ground of being, within which I live and move and breathe. Let us make the accord. I take sanctuary in the heart of being, accepting all of my delusions in thought, word, or deed, born of ignorance, hatred, and greed. Let us give thanks. I give thanks for all beings, awakening to the interbeing of all nature. May my heart be open and my mind clear. May all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and may all come to know that peace which is beyond all understanding. Since it is the practice of enlightenment, that practice has no beginning. And since it is enlightenment within the practice, that realization has no end. So I wanted to talk a bit this evening about breaking down monoliths. So what do I mean by that? Well, I want to start with a story to kind of share what I think some of these mental monoliths are, and why we might create them, and what we can do about that. So, I've always enjoyed riding a bike, cycling, and a few years ago I bought a new bike. I'd had an old mountain bike. I want to do some road cycling, and so I bought a new bike, and then of course I started looking into, well, what other things should I have with this new bike? What are, are there any accessories I need or anything like that? So, obviously a new helmet. I had one, but I got a new helmet. I tend to replace the saddles, the seats on my bikes, just to get something that's a bit more comfortable. Got new pedals, and with this new bike, I decided to get pedals that were clipless, so you actually had a cleat on your shoes that you could kind of snap out, and give you a bit more efficiency as you're pedaling. So of course that meant new shoes, right? Sometimes when you're cycling on a longer ride, it can be comfortable to have some of those padded bike shorts, or even the bibs. They call them bibs. That has basically shorts with suspenders, kind of like an adult singlet or like a onesie, right? That you're wearing to keep you comfortable as you ride. Of course, because I was riding on roads, by traffic, I wanted to have some high visibility clothing, and so there were some shirts that I would normally wear when I was riding, and not having hair, I shaved my head. I would normally wear a do-rag, a bandana, kind of under my helmet, and found like they have cycling caps. Like, these are kind of cool, so I bought a cycling cap to wear and everything. And anyway, all of this stuff, right, to get ready, special clothing, special this, special that, all of the preparation. I kind of made bike riding a thing, like a capital T thing. Instead of just hopping on a bike and going, it was like, well, now I have to do all this stuff. And it was great a lot of the time. But there were also times where I sort of looked at it and I was like, do I really want to, put on all the gear and everything like that, and load up my bike to ride out to the place I had in mind, and, then go out and go and everything. And, like I said, I kind of made it a thing. And there were times where I would sort of talk myself out of going, because cycling, was not just hopping on a bike and going, but it was all this other stuff, right? But I realized, I can just hop on my bike and go and have a good time, and it's great exercise, and I don't need all that other stuff, right? But it made it a thing. And for what it's worth, I've done something similar with meditation too, where I kind of felt, to meditate, I have to, I have to be on the cushion. I have to sit for a certain amount of time at a certain time of day, certain posture, certain mudras, with my hands and certain breathing and everything like that. So maybe this is something that I I do a lot of. But I recognized, with cycling, with meditation, that I created a bit of a mental monolith, right? Now, what is a monolith? A definition of monolith, if you would look it up, mono meaning one, lithic meaning related to stone. So, the first definition of monolith is something formed of a single large block of stone. So big pillars in old buildings that are carved, right, out of like granite and things like that. Those are monolithic. But it also has come to mean kind of in our our vernacular in our society, anything that's large, powerful, and intractably indivisible and uniform, right? So anything that's this big, unit, this big thing, right? And I think mentally, there's almost a third definition. And I would say an overwhelming mental construct that we create that gets in our way. Right? Like I said, I know I do this a lot, but I imagine that I'm not alone. I imagine that there are other people that for whom this is a pretty common exercise. Right? And so I wanted to share some thoughts around these kinds of mental monoliths. Right? And some thoughts on breaking them down and why we build them in the first place. So as I see it, there are really two main kinds of monoliths that we create in our minds. One is, making something into a thing, kind of as I described with bike riding, or thinging something, right? Capital T, thinging something. And the other kind is a generalization. I'll kind of give some examples of both of these. So thinging something, right? There's actually I've always loved A.A. Milne's original Winnie the Pooh books because they're written in such a charming way, and he actually gives a great example in those stories of this kind of thinging, where he, very much in the way that I'm kind of describing it, will capitalize, the first letter of words in a phrase that are meant to be significant to the characters in the book. So, for instance, when Winnie the Pooh is out looking, he's aware, or he's on the lookout for hostile animals, capital H, capital A, right? Because that idea, that fear of running into a hostile animal is looming large in his brain. When he got caught in the entranceway to Rabbit's home, he asked for someone to read him a capital S, capital B sustaining book to kind of help him keep his fortitude, right? When he and Piglet were out hunting for the heffalump, they built a very deep pit, VDP, very deep pit, right? So again, just sort of a literary way to describe when something was important to those characters, and so he thinged those things. It's kind of a clever way to thing those things, right? But we do that in different ways in our lives, and as a society we thing things. One thing that I've seen get thinged over the last decade are winter storms, right? We name them now, right? We give them names the same way that we give hurricanes names, and we've been doing that for a while. The hurricane I remember most recently had an impact on my home with flooding and things like that was Hurricane Sandy. I know Hurricane Agnes looms large in the U.S. in our minds because I wasn't even alive, but I know Agnes in 72, and I know in my basement there were 6 feet of water because someone wrote Agnes 72, 6 feet of water in my basement of the house where I live now. But over the last 10 years, they've started doing that with winter storms as well. So now we name winter storms, and so instead of a big snowstorm or blizzard, it's Winter Storm Jonas. And there is a conventional use in that, where you can say historically to reference, like, well, Jonas dumped 3 feet of snow in 2016, or if you're telling news about it, or hey, like this storm, Winter Storm Brad is set to dump 6 feet of snow or something like that. But I think an unexpected consequence of that is that, now we start to associate any of our, fears or concerns of the disruption or the destruction of one of those big winter storms, BWS, big winter storm, with any named storm. So because Jonas was named, and now we remember the name Jonas, now there's another storm, and let's say they, call it something. Now we're going to be thinking like, oh, it's going to be as bad as the worst one that I remember, right? Because we've thinged those things. We've named them. So it's not just a snowstorm, it's a named snowstorm, and that's serious, right? And I noticed this the other day online, I something about an article about the heat wave that we had a week or so ago caught my eye, and I read through it. And I don't always look at comments online because they can be a little tricky. But I decided for whatever reason to say like, well, what are people saying in response to this article on the heat wave? And it was interesting because people sort of were having that same kind of response to, like we're kind of thinging this heat wave, and those talks of climate change and global warming and things like that. And but people were also saying like, well, but it's July, like the 90s that we're getting, in their area of the world, like this is not unusual for us to have these temperatures in July. It's just summer. We just say it's summer, right? And I know that there were, areas that had record-breaking heat. But for these individuals, they're like, it's summer. Or weather maps. They're like, it used to be if you'd have hot weather, you'd have a little smiling sun icon on the weather map on TV. But now it's this just like deep, blackish, blood red that's for the hottest areas of the country. It almost looks violent, right? And, that's not to say that it wasn't hot, because absolutely it was hot. It's not to say that we shouldn't be careful when it's hot out, because absolutely we should. But I felt like the article was more aimed at creating, a sense of weather as, weather to be feared, capital W, B, and F. Weather to be feared if A. Milne was writing about this heat wave. As opposed to just like, it's hot. It's summer and it's going to be hot. So, be mindful of what you plan to do outside and how much electricity you're consuming to keep yourself cool. And lastly, we thing incidents, past or future incidents. Something small we make into a big thing. If it's a big thing, we make it a life-defining thing for us. And sometimes we'll look back at a period in our lives and say like, oh, that's when things were good, right? That monolith of purity when we were younger, or a different time in our past. All right, I talked about the halcyon days in a previous talk. The kind of purified way, a view of how things used to be, and we're like, it's made up only of the good things we remember, none of the bad or inconvenient ones. But we craft that into this nice shiny monolith and say like, oh, that's when things were good. That's when I was happy, right? Or it could be some small thing coming up in the next week, in the next month, a busy day at work that we know is going to be hard, a presentation we have to make, a tough meeting that we need to run or be a part of. And it becomes that meeting, that presentation, that appointment that we're going to. And we think about it all day, all week, or all month when we're putting our calendar together. And it becomes this looming, dark monolith in our minds. So those are thinging types of monoliths. The other kind that I want to talk about are generalizations, right? And we see this a lot, right? And it's very easy to generalize. Someone always does this thing. We label someone as, this kind of person because of something they did once, or because of something they did at a certain time in their lives, a certain situation or relationship. Or all people who look or act or speak a certain way are all the same. If you voted for this person, we're not going to get along. If you dress a certain way, I'm going to avoid you. In psychology, this is referred to as a confirmation bias, right? Where we tend to only take in information or be on the lookout for information that confirms what we think we already know about certain kinds of people. And then we make those monoliths bigger and bigger, right? And only more solid and more real. Now, before I poo-poo all monoliths, all mental monoliths, there are some, ways that thinking this way serves us well. In terms of making something into a thing, like we honestly do that as a part of our liturgical practice, right? And we build a centering space as part of our reorientation process, to orient ourselves towards our true self. We build that space, that altar, with certain objects, to help us acknowledge our true self, our Buddha nature. And in that acknowledgement, the mundane becomes very significant. It becomes thinged in a way, right? Personally, all of us, I'm sure we have certain places or days or songs that are special to us, right? They mean something to us from our past. But the important thing to remember about these capital T things is that they only matter because they point to something else. They are not intrinsically important, right? And what else do we refer to as not intrinsically existent, right? Our ego selves, right? Our ego self is not intrinsically existent. It's a subjective and conventional expression of our true selves. It points to something that is bigger, right? A lot of times these other monoliths, these things that we thing in our minds are big in and of themselves, and we fixate on them and we obsess over them. And that's not particularly healthy because they cause us to suffer, right? In terms of making generalizations, certainly there are ways that thinking in a general way can be helpful. If you burn yourself getting something out of the oven, it's useful to assume that all things coming out of the oven are going to be hot, right? And you're going to take measures to ensure that doesn't happen. You'll wear, oven mitts, or you'll wait to get something out of the oven. Similarly, if you have an experience where you go on a road trip and you get a flat tire or you run out of gas, the next time you plan a trip, you're going to have a jack and a spare tire, a pump, maybe air pump. You're going to stop at a gas station before your, gas gauge gets too low. So you'll take some measures to make sure you avoid getting stuck in that same way. So that is an okay generalization to make, that you should be prepared for those kinds of things to happen. You don't want to over prepare, right? Where now you're terrified of going out because of all the things that might go wrong, right? That's also not a very healthy way to live. But the important thing about cars and ovens is that they are electrical and mechanical, and therefore largely predictable. People, on the other hand, about which we make a lot of our generalizations, let's be honest, are conscious, not mechanical, and unique. Far more unique than one car to another, right? So be careful about making those kinds of assumptions. Be open to understanding, why people might act the way that they act, and be open to forgiving people who've wronged you in the past. And that also doesn't mean, if you have an ex who hurt you or was abusive or anything like that, forgiveness does not mean going back to that person and trying to, make things the way that you thought they should be. Forgiveness is simply releasing yourself from the control that someone may have over you, because refusing to forgive someone still gives them control over you. And that may be a process. I'm not saying that that's something that is necessarily easy to do. But generalizations and using those experiences to say, well, everyone who is like that person is going to act like that person, without any variation, is not necessarily a very useful way to live. So, why do we create these mental monoliths? Well, as you know, in our practice, we have mindfulness models that explain some of the thought processes that help give rise to the beliefs that give rise to the thoughts and then to the actions and to the results of those actions, and create that cycle of samsara, right? And the model that I would bring up in a situation like this where we're thinking and creating generalizations is really the model of perfection versus wholeness, right? Perfection, looking at the world very much through an either or, perfection or bust kind of attitude, versus wholeness, which is an integrated way of living, which is both and. I accept and integrate everything, not just the things that behave the way that I think that they should behave. Right? Because we often feel that way about the world. We have expectations. We think things should go a certain way. And then if they don't go that way, well, now the world is wrong, or we've been wronged in some way, shape, or form. And perfection, though, is such a tempting thing, and it's so easy to imagine something perfect, because perfection is part of our imagination, right? Probably a lot of us have been asked, like, oh, what's your ideal mate, or what's your perfect first date, right? Questions they would ask on like those old relationship shows, and perfect mate is this, and this, and you name all these things, and the ideal first date is this, and this, and then you're holding out for that perfect person who doesn't exist, right? Or you go out on a date with someone and you're like, it has to be this way, and it doesn't go the way that you want, and then you're disappointed, right? Either or. Either it's perfect or forget about it, right? Perfection is also very easy to hold in our minds because it's very one-dimensional. Despite being very pristine and ideal, it's also very flat, right? It's very binary. It is or it isn't. If X, then Y. If I do this, then it has to go this way, or else it's not perfect and therefore it's a failure. If someone wears, this clothing, likes this sports team, talks this way, they're always a certain way. That's very easy to think and make up those kinds of weird rules about everyone around you. And that, oh, well, if I encounter those people, I need to react the same way to anyone and everyone who's like that. By contrast, wholeness can be much sloppier, much more unpredictable, much more three-dimensional, right? But it's so much more realistic and inclusive. And in our practice, it's very important for us to be realistic. We are in pursuit of what is real and true, right? So we want a worldview that is realistic. And we want a worldview from a place of oneness that is inclusive, that accounts for everything. I can take a bike ride, and maybe I have in my head that the bike ride is going to go a certain way, 72 degrees on a nice flat, right? But maybe instead of making the left turn that I expected to make, I take the right turn. And then I get caught in the rain, and then I get muddy. But I meet other riders, and we have a great time, and it could be the best ride ever and stick in my mind because it wasn't what I expected, right? Because I took in the whole thing and not just the elements that I thought I wanted to take in. Someone can root for the other team and be a good person, not root for the other team, or they can get the heck out of here, right? It could be a record-breaking hot day, and it could be a good day to sit in the shade and read a book. Doesn't mean that your plans need to be ruined. It could be a really tough day at work, and it taught you a new skill. Because we don't often get to choose how much of life comes our way. So we should try to leave ourselves open to what we might be able to make of that experience and what we may be able to experience. The last story about monolithing that I want to tell, and maybe I've told this before, so forgive me if you've heard this before, but I'm a musician. I like to write music, and I used to write a lot of music in the past, but I've had a harder time doing it the last few years. I used to be in a band, and since then I just don't write as often as I do. But honestly, I had in my head, speaking of monolithing, that music was something that I could do if I was writing about like love or loss, right? So, when my wife and I were dating, wrote a ton of music, so in love, right? When my wife passed away, I wrote a lot of music about that hurt and what I was going through. When I eventually started dating again, I wrote more music about that, kind of the ups and downs of that process and things like that. New relationships or when relationships get complicated. Lots of fodder for creative expression, right? But over the last few years, I've kind of put less emphasis on dating, so it's not something that I've been doing. And with that, I haven't really been writing a lot of music. So songwriting became a very, one dimensional, monolithic thing for me, where it's like songs have to be when there's a relationship or getting out of one, right? That's when I can write. And if I'm not doing that, then I can't write. But despite all of that, one evening I had a tune just kind of hit me. And so, I hummed it into my phone, record it, so I could come back to it. And it was over a year, actually, that I was working on this song because just nothing would come. But the song was still there. I was like, I feel like there's something there. And I started to feel it kind of come together. I struggled with the topic. And then when one did hit me, the song started to form. But boy, I was really having a hard time with the lyrics because I had a certain, feeling for the verse. And I'm like, my lyrics have to fit that phrasing. And I was struggling with it. And I was, writing down lyrics and crossing them out. It was just it was very frustrating. And then I realized, I was like, how ridiculous that I'm, hamstringing myself and not letting myself put, lyrics into this song that don't fit what I had in mind for the verse. This is my song. If anyone is able to change it, I am, right? I built this monolith of the song had to be a certain way. Perfection versus wholeness, either or. The perfection mindset, either or. I had it in my head that it had to be a certain way. And once I tore down that monolith, then suddenly the song came out. Within a week, the lyrics were written and the song came together. And not to be too cheesy, but how we live our lives is our song, right? We play it for ourselves. We play it for those around us. It's our art that we put into the world. And it's very easy to be afraid of making that art because we feel we have to be perfect. We feel it's either or. It goes this way or it's not worth doing. Right? And we stare at those monoliths and we get frozen by that need for perfection. It's very easy to come up with, but impossible to achieve. But I would encourage you all to keep living your life as your song. Right? Keep doing the work. Embrace those ups and downs because they're going to come either way. Nothing is permanent. Right? Sometimes life is messy and inconsistent, but that song is valuable because it's whole and it includes everything. So I hope that was helpful. The moment we receive true and trusting, solid and clear like a diamond, infinite light and life embrace and protect us, liberating us completely. Let us take the 4 immeasurable vows. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. Delusions are endless. I vow to end them. The ways of compassion and wisdom are boundless. I vow to embody them. The way is unattainable. I vow to attain it. Let us take the precepts for the community of the vow. I allow my true self to manifest in all aspects of life. I take complete responsibility for my own life and all of my actions. I affirm my personal being and acknowledge it as a path to awakening and freedom. I embrace all aspects of my personal being, including my shadow, so that they may be transformed. I affirm an attitude of openness to my true self, even in the midst of suffering. So as we usually do, what I'd like to do now is chant the Nembutsu. So Namu Amida Butsu. And we'll chant that through a few times, and between each one, I will hit the Mokugyo, which is the wooden fish drum. And as we chant, I would invite all of you to, at your home altar centering space, to light incense and to chant. And then when we close, we will sit briefly in silent meditation. to acknowledge the connection of our practice with the practice of everyone today, and those who have come before and those who will come in the future. Let us recite the Bodhisattva's Gatha. We dedicate this practice to the welfare of all beings throughout space and time. May it always be so. So as always, I hope that you found these words and this time beneficial. If you would like to learn more about our practice, or would like to talk to someone, maybe you're going through a rough time in your life, and would like to talk to us about the Four Directions and our practice at the Dragonfly Sangha, you can reach out to us at AskSenseiTony.com or at DragonflySangha.com. And I hope that you all have a wonderful week, tearing down those mental monoliths that we all have a habit of building up. So thank you.